Hey, welcome everyone. We'll get started in just a few moments. Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Sarah Carr, and I'm Chief Knowledge Broker for OCTO, which stands for Open Communications for the Ocean. And we're very pleased to have you all with us today. And it's my honor to present Alvin Chelliah from the Reef Malaysia. And I had the pleasure of meeting Alvin in person the beginning of last year and working with him on a project. So I'm really pleased he can be with us today. And he's going to be talking about involving local communities in marine conservation and management, community marine conservation groups, CMCGs, that Reef Malaysia has been working with in Malaysia. Um, Before we get started, I wanted to let you know we'll have a formal presentation from Alvin, and then we'll have time for question and answer afterwards. But you're welcome to submit questions at any point during the webinar. You can send them in, you can post them in the chat, or you can share them in the Q&A in a button area of the Zoom webinar. But feel free to post them in the chat too. So and their recording of today's webinar will be available at www.octogroup.org/webinars after, like, probably sometime tomorrow. I'll post the link for that in the chat in case you want to share it with anyone and check it out. But anyway, there will be a recording because that people ask that a lot. So anyway, we'll go ahead and get started. Alvin, I'll pass it over to you. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Hi everyone. Let me just pull up the share screen. Right. You all see this?
Yes, we do. Yep, it looks great.
Okay. So, hi everybody. Firstly, thank you, Octo. Thank you, Sarah, for giving us this opportunity to share a little bit. And thank all of you for taking the time to listening in to hear a little bit about how we have been involving local communities in marine conservation and management, especially with the community marine conservation groups that we have here in Malaysia. So, to give you a little bit of background, Malaysia has a very top-down governance structure, right? So we have a federal government and we have state governments. And most of decision making is highly centralized around the federal government. They control most of the policies, most of resources, and especially when it comes to environmental management, decision making is dominated by the federal ministries and agencies, especially if that place is a wildlife reserve or a marine protected area. The state has very little say in how these places are managed and run. Now, in 2010, just like many other countries, we were heavily impacted by the second global coral bleaching event. It got a lot of attention. People were worried. A lot of people were concerned. The reef managers were concerned. Business operators were very concerned because they didn't know exactly what this would mean, how it would impact tourism. They were getting mixed messages from the governing agencies. And the people living on the islands were also pretty concerned of how things would turn out. Now, after that first bleaching event passed, Reef Check started a little bit of reef rehabilitation to help these damaged reefs recover, especially it started on Tioman, yeah? And the following year, we amplified these efforts. So we started doing more rehabilitation on other locations around the country, a few different states. And at the same time, we started looking deeply into building reef resilience. So we wanted to see what we could actually do to help reefs get them more prepared for the next bleaching event. And we also, during this time, were trained on the first bleaching resilient methods that were coming out during that time. So in 2013, we did resilient surveys along the east coast of Peninsular Malaysia, covering 3 states. Now, going forward from those surveys, the following year, we said we wanted to set up a long-term project that specifically would look into building social and ecological resilience. And we had this idea of doing it through sustainable tourism and co-management, right? We ended up choosing Tioman Island, and we named the program Cintai Tioman, which simply means love Tioman. But why did we choose Tioman? Well, Tioman is one of the largest islands that is off the east coast of Peninsular Malaysia. And it was, well, it still is one of our mega biodiversity hubs. But at the same time, it was experiencing rapid development. So currently, we've got about 105 resorts, chalets, and hotels on the island. We've got 45 dive centers, and all this on an island which is only about 20 kilometers tip to tip. So, small island for all that development, right? We were also pretty confident that we knew the island well enough because we were doing surveys there since 2007, and we had an ongoing school program since 2009. So we knew the community pretty well. And like I said, reef rehabilitation efforts that started in 2010 meant that we were already working with dive shop operators and the local communities. So this was not going to be all completely new for them. And finally, one of the most important factors was the reef resilience surveys conducted in 2013 showed that Tioman had one of the most resilient and some of the healthiest reefs in Peninsular Malaysia. So these were the factors that made us decide. Now, the people, the villagers on this island, they were all mainly fisher folk, right? Before the island was gazetted back in the early 90s, they were mainly fishermen. But when the island was gazetted, again, by the federal government, they had little say, they had no say, they were not asked, consulted, they were not given any chance to voice their concerns. The island was made a complete no-take MPA. So even they had to go 2 nautical miles out to sea before they could do any kind of fisheries. They were stuck, so a lot of them moved to tourism. But at the same time, this was a good change for them because it also did help them earn more money actually compared to being fishermen. So many of them did make that switch. Almost all of them, currently about 90% of the islanders are involved in tourism. However, they were not really trained, so they didn't have polished skills. They just did it or made things up as they went along, right? So if you imagine the chalets, the resorts, the majority of them are local run, simple, basic chalets and resorts. Yeah. So when we went in, what we did was initially for the environment, we identified all the local threats. We wanted to know what were all the different things that were going on, and we wanted to find simple, realistic solutions to these threats. And the whole idea was we want to build ecological resilience, right? So remove as many local threats as you can so that when a big climate impact comes through, like a bleaching event, the reefs would have a higher chance of recovery. The second thing for the local community, we wanted to know what their weaknesses were and then empower them. So get them better paying jobs, get them trained up, skilled so that they would not have to rely on harvesting from the sea to supplement their income. Yeah, they could earn better and reduce their impacts to the reef. And finally, we also wanted to involve them in co-management, in getting them a platform to have a say when it comes to how these marine resources are being managed. And we were very aware that they did not reach out to us. They didn't ask us to come help. It was us that decided that we wanted to do this. It was us that wanted to go and start this project. So uh, not wanting to rock up there with our set of activities planned, we asked them, So we had many consultation sessions, just asking them what they thought the main concerns were in the island. We talked to villagers, we talked to resort operators, dive shop operators, anyone, basically anyone that was living on the island or making a living from that island. And then we asked them to, list down all their concerns. We went through that very long list and picked out things that were similar to what we wanted to solve. For example, solid waste and sewage pollution. This was a big thing that came out. During the peak season, we receive around 250,000 tourists. And during the peak season, we can generate about 8 tons of trash a day. That's 8,000 kilograms, right? So this was a reoccurring issue that we wanted to solve as well. So it was one of the things that we worked on from the start. Um, Again, the approach was to get the locals involved. So I'm not from Tioman. I grew up in the city. It's like a five hour by car and 2 hours by boat to get here. So I'm considered city boy, right? Um, but we worked with the locals. We identified a couple who were interested, who had interest in conservation, and we got them working with us full time. And we asked them, like, okay, if we were to set up a waste management system, what would be the best approach? Because it is very different. The way they do things on the island is so different. And I'm sure I'm probably preaching to the choir. Some of you probably work in the same field, and you know what I mean. But yes, so getting the local input from the very start was important. Um, we set up waste segregation locations like the one in this picture here. We call them greenhouses where people could bring in their recyclables. We realized that things like glass bottles was a huge issue because the island is a duty-free island, so we get a lot of beer and liquor bottles coming in, but there was no way to get rid of it. You couldn't burn it in the incinerator that we have on the island. We couldn't send it out for recycling because nobody wanted to take glass. It was too cheap, and we couldn't compost it. So we ended up getting things like a glass crushing machine that would crush the glass into sand that could be used for construction, which then meant the locals would not be taking beach sand anymore to mix for concrete. Yeah, it was things like this where they would say like, hey, if you did this, then you would solve a few issues at once. So it was really helpful to get that local insight. The other big issue was sewage, right? So when I moved there, we started doing water quality testing. And then we started talking to the local resorts, businesses, the villagers about sewage issues. And this island has been receiving tourists since the 80s. Yeah, a jump in tourism since the early 90s after it was made a marine park. Yet the first time septic tanks were serviced and maintained and desludged was in 2015, after we took the results from the water quality testing to the government agencies, to the local islanders, and created that demand, right? So because it was not only some NGO saying like, hey, you need to do this, because it was a local community demanding that, something be done about sewage, the government did something. And since then, they've actually took it a step further and put it into the development plans to make sure that each village would have sewage treatment facilities. They've already done it for one village and they're now working for the other locations. Now, talking to the different business operators, it was interesting because the snorkel operators would blame the dive centers and say like, yeah, the damage is all because of these divers. They are standing on the reef. You can see the pictures here, right? They are standing on the reef, killing the corals. Whereas you talk to the dive shops and they'll be like, oh no, it's the snorkel guides. Look, they let the snorkelers do anything. You can touch the turtles. You can take the snorkel guides would jump into the water, catch turtle, bring it out on the boat so that everyone could get a picture with the turtle. Yeah. Um, the picture in the middle, right at the bottom, that's a boat that has grounded itself on the reef at the most popular dive and snorkel site on the island. Yeah. So these things were happening. The picture in the middle, right on top, is resorts and dive shops building way into the beach reserve. So illegal development on the beach reserve. So these were issues, and everyone was blaming each other. Now, we introduced responsible tourism practices. again, we trained local islanders as assessors. So we used the ASEAN Green Hotel standards for the accommodations on the island. We used the Green Fins approach, which is for the scuba diving and snorkeling industry. But we got local islanders trained up as assessors. So it was them then going to these businesses, doing an assessment, giving them recommendations, points to work on, and then working with them to help them improve, right? And because it was done like this, the uptake was very positive because it didn't feel like these outsiders coming in to police us. It was just, sometimes it was even their own relative, their cousin or nephew, or if not, if nothing else, it would have definitely been their neighbor, right, coming in to do this assessment. So the whole thing felt very communal rather than like very strict or very like an outsider coming in telling them what to do. Now, for the snorkel guides, that was also very interesting because in Malaysia, you don't need any formal licensing or training to be a snorkel guide. You can buy, if you have a boat, you can just buy a few life vests and some snorkels and mask, and you can be a snorkel guide tomorrow. So we came up with a training manual based on the ISO standards. We got the Department of Marine Parks to endorse the training, and we started doing trainings with the local guides. And again, it was, we got the locals were also trained to become trainers. So it was more of a coaching session, I would say. Yeah. Getting them to realize what they should be doing, what kind of practices they should be following, and what they should be avoiding. Then it came to the local community as a whole, right? Local practices, things that they've been doing for many years, many generations. Now, some of these were seen as non-compliances to the marine park. And to a certain extent, it was true because the locals felt like this isn't our park, this isn't our marine protected area. The federal government decided this way in the capital, far away from us. We were not consulted. We are not involved. We don't have a say. So I don't recognize it. I don't see it. I don't listen. It's like, yeah, it's not, this is not my marine park. So there was this hard feeling towards it, but there was also some practices that were being done where they just didn't realize how that was actually harming the environment. So again, we started with education. We started with teaching in the kindergarten, the primary school, in the secondary school. It was very hard to get to the baby boomers, the older generation. Um, I was young at that time. The most of the locals that we were working with were the youth. So it was very hard to engage the older generation, but the younger generation were very accepting. So we got them in the water, snorkeling, taking them out of the classroom to experience the mangroves. It was very interesting as well because as the island had developed so rapidly, the locals were losing that nice traditional connection they used to have with the environment. I was shocked to learn how many of the kids could not even swim in school. We had to teach them how to swim, right? But it worked. Yeah. So we did this, we started teaching them. And then while we were doing all these programs, we were also having a lot of conversation around the way things were being managed. And one thing that kept coming up was the majority of them felt that the current management structure was not suitable for their local needs. And in fact, the majority of them said that they should be involved in management. They wanted a seat at the table. They wanted to be involved in decision making. So we talked to them um, about co-management, right? About how we feel the local communities should be working with the governments, with other stakeholders like the business operators and external agents, like other NGOs, researchers, universities, to share, 1 minute, to share responsibility on decision making and management of the marine resources on the island. And we brought this to the government and talked to them and said like, hey, Department of Marine Parks, why don't you get the locals more involved? And they said, well, they're not trained. So we said, well, that's an easy fix. What if we train them? So we started doing that. We started doing intensive training. We taught them how to scuba dive. We taught them how to do reef check surveys, how to monitor bleaching, how to rehabilitate reefs, how to respond to uh, oil oil spills, how to respond to CO2 outbreaks. We got them installing mooring lines because it's one thing to tell people not to anchor, but if you don't give them an option, then they're still going to anchor, right? So these islanders were trained to do all these skills. And then we went back to the government and said, look, we've got this group of islanders who are now trained and skilled, who can do all this amazing work. Would you support them and fund them? And they said yes. So the federal government started funding this group on Tioman Island. And they started doing these various tasks, like you can see in this table. And after doing this work for a few years, the federal government actually saw the importance of this group and how valuable they were, that they actually officially recognized them as strategic partners. Now, this was a big thing for us because it was the first time ever that the federal government is recognizing a local group on an island as a strategic partner. Yeah. And in fact, the following year, they introduced this thing called Reef Care. So based on what they had seen with the success of this Tioman Marine Conservation Group, they introduced this thing called Reef Care, and they allocated patches of reef that was now under the care of these local community groups. And for us, this was a big step forward because in the past, our government did not share this kind of power, right? And then COVID hit. So when COVID hit, uh, I'm sure it might be the same for you, but in Malaysia, conservation activities came to a grinding halt because the standard operating procedure in the past was we were always dependent on volunteers or people that were coming from the outside, that were traveling across state, across international borders, state borders, and even across district. But during COVID, we were not allowed to leave districts. Okay, it was very strict COVID lockdowns in Malaysia, and it extended for 2 years. Now, while most of conservation work in Malaysia came to a stop, on Tioman, things continued. And this was when I think the value of the community group really shined because they were doing things like, ghost net removals. You look at the numbers, they removed 24 ghost nets in 2020 and 37 in 2021. Some of these nets, to give you a image of the size, some of these weigh about 800 kilos, and they can be the length of 100 meters. So if you don't remove them quickly, you get turtles, sharks, dolphins, all stuck and dead on them, right? And the reason we had so many during this period was also because a lot of the enforcement boats were being used for sending of food, of vaccines. So we had a lot of illegal fishing, a lot of encroachment. People from outside who were not fishermen were illegally coming in. They didn't know the area, they didn't know the reefs. The nets were getting stuck on the reef and they would abandon it and run. Yeah. But also during this time, we had crown of thorn outbreaks. So not only did we have a pandemic, we also had an epidemic at hand where we had crown of thorn outbreaks. And if you see, they removed about over 1,000 in 2020 and over 2,000 the following year. Again, like what did they say? One crown of thorns can eat about a kilometer of reef in a year. So you imagine if all these were not dealt with, we would have had a massive loss to reef cover that year. So after COVID, we went back again to the governments and we said, like, look, this is how important the local communities are. Look how much they were able to do. Look at their value during COVID. So the government realized it and expanded it to cover all the villages in Tioman. But at the same time, they also highly recommended that we replicate this approach in other locations. They didn't fund it, but they said, would you look into replicating this? And they also selected other reef care partners in different locations. So we started in 2023, after the pandemic and everything, we started working with other groups. Yeah. So there were two other reef care partners, NGOs that the Department of Fisheries had identified in north of us. And this was Ecotier in Prendian and Pulihara in Langtengah. So we started training them. We brought them to Tioman, show them how things were being done. We shared manuals, training guides, things like that. We also ended up did set up a few new locations, which was in over different states. So in Terengganu, in the south, in Johor, and in Sabah, we also set up new locations. Now, this was very interesting because in some of these locations, like the ones in Borneo and Sabah, we were dealing with local communities who, in some places, couldn't even read or write, had no proper formal education, right? So in the past, if you imagine, people like this rarely ever got a chance to get involved in this kind of work or had their voices heard using such a platform. And we also realized at the same point, like there were many people out there who wanted to get involved. So we had to put all these thoughts and all this experience down to paper. So we created like different toolkits. So this is one for reef rehabilitation. And yes, there are many out there already, but we needed to tweak something that would suit the way things work locally. And most importantly, we also needed to make sure that we had this available in the local languages. These manuals are all made freely available. They're on our website right now. And what we realized, it wasn't only local communities reaching out, asking us for these kind of things. It was also dive centers, resorts that wanted to do more. So instead of waiting for us to be able to go out to them, these are now all made available and they can access them and use them, and they could just refer to us remotely if they needed extra help. Yeah. We did the same for the training modules. So remember how we said we did things like post net removals, like installation of mooring lines, um, reef rehabilitation, crown of thorn control. So all these bleaching monitoring, we put them down to paper. We made methods that we thought was simple, convenient enough that we could use local islanders, we could use local communities. So all citizen science approach, right? But we put it all down in paper so that now anyone could get this and refer to it. And this has been really valuable because, in fact, we've published like 3 papers using data collected by these local communities. So citizen science, but the first ever coral spawning recorded in the country was published by us together with the local community, right? We published the first ever paper on ghost net numbers. So things like this that, it's simple enough for the local communities to do, yet it's very important because they're filling in gaps, they're filling in this information that in the past was not being captured. Now, since then, over these few years, some of these local communities have really grown. It's been such a pleasure to see how fast they've grown. They've taken these projects and made it theirs. And some of the achievements are things that we even did not imagine they would get so fast. So if you see the picture on the bottom right, it's a few of the islanders in Silaka and in Borneo who were selected to be auxiliary wardens under the Sabah parks. Yeah, and this is something very special because not only were they given the mandate to do conservation activities, but they are also now involved in enforcement. Once again, a new first for us because in the past, even with the reef care program in Peninsula, the islanders, though they were overseeing a patch of reef, whenever it came to enforcement, they could not get involved. But in Sabah, things have taken the next step where now they're helping catch fish bombers, illegal fishers inside the marine protected areas. Working with the women's groups, we've done things like try to improve their economy by welcoming tourists to their homes. So doing up a room in their house, introducing homestay programs. So now they're earning more money, which means they do not need to rely on harvesting from the sea as much. Yeah, they don't need to supplement their livelihood by depending on harvesting from nature. Now, the picture on the top left is a interesting one. It's waste management. We are called Reef Check, but somehow we've ended up being so involved in waste management because this is a big issue in Malaysia. And on our islands, we have waste issues, solid waste issues. And now, on a few different islands, where we realized there wasn't a proper municipal solid waste management system. Islanders were expected to deal with their trash on their own, which meant it gets into the sea, right? So now we've started like collecting trash, not only recyclables, but everyday trash. Food gets composed, recyclables get sent out for recycling, and the others get sent to a landfill. So we're avoiding this trash getting into the sea. This year, I just heard back from one of our colleagues and one of the communities and one of the islands this year, they taught themselves how to compost and they just completed about 500 kilos of composting. So that for me, that's like, wow, amazing, right? Because imagine all that would have gone straight back into the sea if not. So in this past 2 years, yeah, in 2023, 24, sorry, I don't have all the numbers for this year yet, but like 2023, 2024, 188 reefs were surveyed by local islanders, local communities. 97 bleaching monitorings were conducted. During the fourth global bleaching event last year, we had local groups in the water monitoring reefs around the country. And again, once again, because we were working with the local community, we were able to cover a wide area. No other university or government agency were able to do this. And we've got a white paper out on this. You can download it from our website and read about the bleaching monitoring and the results from 2024. Yeah, 70 mooring lines were installed. So this means 70 reefs are no longer being anchored on a daily basis. Yeah, 226 reefs rehabilitated. Yeah, underwater cleanups, ghost nets, 12,000 kilos of ghost nets removed in 2 years. Yeah, so it shows you that the local communities have a very important role to play when it comes to conservation. And it's very sad. I feel now, after working with the communities for so long, it's very sad often when you look at projects, they are more often than not just bystanders. It is outsiders coming in, whether it's coming in internationally or across state from the cities. Other people are coming in to do this conservation work, and the local communities are often not even included or involved, just standing at the sidelines and watching what's going on. So I think this is a very important resource that should be tapped in. And yes, again, I'm very aware it's not something we created. We did not think of this on our own. We know other places have been doing it for longer. I'm just saying for Malaysia, it was something new, and it has proven to be a very effective way of doing things. So if you are listening in and it's something that you all have been doing for a long time, that's great. We should talk more about it. And if you're listening in and in your place, you don't have something like this, then do consider. Yeah. Going forward, our aim is that these groups that we are training up and setting up can work independently. So the Tioman group was the first one to be established way back in 2015, 2016, right? So they are the most advanced group and they are now a registered company on their own. They've registered with the government. They are their own company. They've got their own bank account, company bank accounts. These are big things, right? For Malaysia standards, these are big things. And we hope that we will be able to do the same for all these different groups, like train them up to the level where they can manage the accounts, manage the projects, write for grants. We are still helping them with getting funding for them to continue the work that they do. But the idea would be that they would all be independent and reef check and walk away and know that this work will continue being done by the islanders. We are very actively talking to the state governments to try to take back some of this power from the federal or try to work more closely with the federal by setting up state parks, which is under their jurisdiction. It's something the law does allow them to do, so that then the state government can get more involved with what is happening or decisions that are being made for islands that are in their state, right? And they could get the locals on board as well, given a platform to talk. So this is something very important for us. Our big focus in Reef Check right now is making sure that co-management of marine protected areas is institutionalized. Yeah, so we're talking to both the federal government, the state government, on how we could make this happen. So we're talking to members of parliament, to politicians, to village representatives, to make sure that this is something that becomes the new norm, that we move away from a top-down government basis where decisions are made far away in the capital hours away from the nearest sea, and brought down somewhere to the middle where, yes, the federal government has a say, but also the local people on the ground and the local governments also have a voice at this table. So it is co-managed together and not working in silos. So that's all for me. I'm going to stop here. Uh, this QR leads to our website where I mentioned all our papers and reports. Everything is freely made available there. So feel free to check it out and download it if you would like to. Thank you very much. And I'll pass this back to Sarah.
Thank you, Alvin. I love the story. I've gotten to hear it before. As I said, I was able to work with Alvin last year. But I love the story. It's such a hopeful one. And so thank you so much for coming to share it with us. I have to say you were very effective. The questions I had, you answered later on in your presentation. But I'd remind everyone, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat or the Q&A. Um, One thing which you then started to address that I was wondering, like, do you think the state and federal governments in Malaysia are starting to think about co-management in their designation of MPAs and design? I know that's the goal, but and then like any ideas for what that would look like? Would they want to integrating more communities in the planning aspects and also sort of trying to set up something like the CMCGs immediately. I don't know what would it look like, and do you think it's already starting to happen, or is it's still a hopeful a hope?
Okay. So we have been talking about this concept to the state governments. So for the federal governments for a much longer time now, but for the state governments, I would say actively pushing this concept since last year. Okay.
Right.
And so far we have had quite a positive response. So two states are already talking to us about setting up an approach where so we are calling it something like the Protected Area Management Body. Yeah. So a platform where you would allow local groups, local stakeholders to have a say. So it would be this body which is uh, then convening one maybe around 4 times a year, if nothing else, yeah, to come together to talk like, okay, what's plans for this quarter? What are we thinking about? Short-term plans, long-term plans. How do the different groups, the different stakeholders have a role to play? So, for example, if we are talking about sewage issues, water quality issues, so it's in the interest of the government, the state government, that that problem be solved because they don't want to be known to have a bad water quality in that area because it's going to impact their tourism, it's going to impact health, fisheries, everything, right? It's going to also benefit the resorts to get this problem solved because once this news gets out that your water is polluted, tourists are not going to come. So we're trying to get them to sit around to realize, like, look, this is not the government's problem, or this is not the diver's problem. Yeah. So that's the current approach to set up these protected area management bodies that would convene to discuss on short-term and long-term plan of actions. And then that the government would then follow through to find out which government agencies are responsible to do which bits. Yeah. And then also see how the local stakeholders would be able to work with them to solve the problems.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Alvin. That's super helpful. We have a question from Emma.
Mhm.
What techniques did you use for gathering information from local communities about their feelings towards challenges and solutions? You mentioned you were seen as a city boy. So did you have to engage other people to deliver these techniques?
Oh, yes, most definitely. I could go out and do a whole set of interviews, and then I would ask my colleague, who's an islander, to go ask the same questions to the same person, and it'll be different, right? When they see the city folk, they tell you the answers they know you want to hear, right? But when it's an
Mm.
islander talking to them, then the whole heart and soul and spirit, everything comes out, right? And they share with you. It also helped with me because I eventually, like, I moved to the island. I got I got married on the island. I'm raising my kids on the island. So after a few years, they started to see me as no longer a city boy and now one of them. But the initial years were very tough. So, um, yes, to do these kind of surveys, if you want the real answers, we would ask the islanders themselves to go and ask other people. Yeah. And till today, I would say it's a very, very obvious thing. I would see universities and researchers come in and they would do questionnaires and everything, and they would share the results with us. And I'm like, yeah, you can chuck that all, you know. So
Yeah.
we are very aware of that. If you're going to ask anything that's sensitive, anything that's going to point fingers at people that are supposed to be doing their work but are not doing their work, the government, right? Things like that. If they do not trust you, they will not tell you. Yeah.
Were there any special techniques that even your islander sort of interviewers used,
Oh,
or just
yes.
short conversations?
So, so what we would do is we would have a set of questions that we have in mind. Um, but we would not try to take a list of questionnaires and go sit in front of them like, okay, question one. It was always centered around discussions. So we would have discussions. We try to remember what are the questions you want to go through, and we have somebody quietly, uh, not making it obvious, taking down the notes. Yeah. Again, just it was always tried to be as informal as possible, and we always would mix it up with both group discussions and one-to-one discussions. So we would have a group setting, and then we would also go to the houses. Yeah. So for example, if we knew we wanted to know something in a group setting, you would realize like a lot of the male would speak, but the females would more of listen. So if you needed to get a real understanding, then we would send ladies to go to the house to speak to the women while we know the husbands are out working, right? So you'll get the real picture from both. So again, it's very cultural, right? So we would depend on the local communities to guide us and say like, hey, who do you think should do this? What time do you think it will be good to go do these questions? How should we set this up? And again, it's so interesting. Even in Malaysia, island to island can be so different. Like after doing stuff in Tioman for so long, when we were going to go to the other places, I was a bit confident. And then I went there and got a reality check. And the islanders there told me like, hey, that might have worked in Tioman, but here we do things differently. And I was like, right, you're the boss. You tell me what to do. And they're like, okay, we should do it like this, like this, like this. You know. So yeah, that was the technique.
Okay.
Mm.
Thank you, Alvin. And we have a question from Taran. Great presentation and fantastic work. Do you think education of younger people trickled up to the baby boomers of the communities? If younger people and their families told them about what they learned, or have they remained hard to reach?
Oh no, it definitely trickled up, right? That was I think um, one of the best things we did was focus so much effort on the education because number one, it also helped with how they looked at us because now we were no longer just some NGO, but we were teachers. And in Malaysia, these kind of things, we are very hierarchy kind of society as well. It's not just the government that's top down. So, oh, you're a teacher. Oh, you're teaching in the school. So a bit more respect for you. But also teaching the kids, especially when some of these kids, they went through our program from a young age and then up to high school. And then after school, we started doing the dive training with them and things like that. And the parents, I'll remember this one case in particular. The father, he was so hard against us. I remember the first time I went to his business and I just wanted to give him recycle bins. He chased me out. He said, "No, you don't come here tell me that I'm not doing this properly and I'm not doing that and I need to change you outsider, blah blah blah." Long story short, few years later, he's like one of our most active supporters. He helped me rally a whole village to stop taking giant clams. So
Mhm.
it did trickle up because they see the change in their kids. They see us investing so much time and money and effort in their own kids. He asked me somewhere in between, he said, like, you're spending all this time on my son. Is he even that worth it? Like he didn't even finish school. And I was like, Yeah, he might not be great at ad maths, but he's like amazing in the water, he can do all this.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it did help. It did trickle up to the baby boomers. And right now, I would say we've even managed to capture that generation. Not all, definitely, but at least 40 to 50% of that generation are also active in our activities.
Mm, that's a lot. So yeah,
Mm,
fantastic. Um, for all the various community marine conservation groups, like what level of support, what's sort of the range of level of support? Are some really sort of fully independent of Reef Check Malaysia support now, or are like, whereas the sort of the newer ones are getting more support, or what sort of
okay.
range of support is there?
So the newer ones, the ones that we only started setting up after 2023,
Mhm.
they are still getting a lot of support from us. So we are still planning activities for them. We are also always making sure one of us is with them when they go out to do this work. With the Tioman one, because they are the oldest and because we've had a lot of time to train them. So, for example, a lot of them are already dive masters. So there isn't that concern of sending them out to sea to do work without, having one of us to monitor safety. Um,
Mhm.
but even with the Tioman Marine Group, we are still supporting them in the sense of getting finance to them because it is
Mhm.
very, very difficult to raise funds in Malaysia, right? So a group like this, we are currently working on that, on polishing their skills when it comes to writing grants. I mean, this is something I also struggle with, honestly, right? So we are still helping them to get the funding, but in terms of the day-to-day work, they are independent. So we would tell them, for example, like now, we already know how much money is available for them for 2026. So we had a meeting recently, say like, look, this is the money you've got for 2026. This is confirmed funding. You need to start planning your work, right? Yeah. So the hope would be that soon they would be able to get their own funding as well, and then we won't have to do that.
Okay. All right, great. Are there any sort of similar groups or that were sort of inspiration for any of this work outside of Malaysia that has already existed before you got started? And then I'm also curious, sort of like, are there any sort of projects that you know of going on outside of Malaysia right now, based using your guidebooks? And it's wonderful that you've set up, sort of documented all these experiences and methods and useful information.
Yeah. Yes. So we did not invent this on our own. We did learn,
Mm.
especially I would say from our neighboring countries like Indonesia and Philippines, where we notice in how they were much more decentralized. The governments were decentralized, the marine protected areas were decentralized, and they had way more involvement of local communities at a very local level involved in managing a protected area. So that was the inspiration. Um, and that was what we wanted to replicate as well. Yeah, but we were not sure how it would work because in those countries, the the local government, the batangas or people like that, they've got the local town council or district council, they've got that authority to set up like a small locally managed MPA. Whereas in Malaysia, these MPAs, these protected areas, they were all set up by the federal government, right? So there
Mm.
was that challenge there. So the idea was like, how do we come in the middle, meet it halfway? Yeah. Now, for people that have used the manual outside Malaysia, yes, we have shared this with some people from Indonesia so far that we know who have used it and said like, hey, this is some good stuff here. I'm
Okay.
not really sure who else has assessed it because it's made available on the website, but to be honest, we are not like really, we don't have a proper way of tracking like who's downloading and so unless they
Yeah.
then come back to us and say like, hey, we've had a look at this, it's amazing. But within the country, we've had other NGOs reach out and say like, "Hey, this is really helpful, and thanks for sharing it."
Okay. Well, good. Well, hopefully the people who are listening now, so if they are using this, they'll let you know. Um, Alvin, I guess I think we'll
Mm.
wrap up now. People have additional questions, you could send them in quickly. Emma says, "Thank you, Alvin, for your presentation. It was a pleasure to hear you speak about your work again. Appreciate your knowledgeable and humble approach to conservation." So,
Most
and
welcome.
yes, and I'd back that up. No, it's such a pleasure to
Mm.
hear about this work. I mean, I loved hearing about it last year in person, and it's great that we were able to share it. And I hope that many of the people on the call are inspired by this and for doing their own work in a similar vein. But thank you again for being here today. And for those of you who are here, hopefully you've caught the link where you could find the recording, and I encourage you to share with colleagues. And she does amazing work. So thank you again, Alvin. Thank you for everyone for being here. And we hope to get you on future webinars. We don't do a whole lot in the time zone because I'm based in the US, but we try to do them when we can. But all right. Thank you again, Alvin.
All right, most
All right.
welcome. Bye bye.
Okay. Bye, everyone.